On a sunny morning in the small town of Maplewood, Ilara examined an old diary she had found at an antique fair. The yellowed pages, worn by time, told stories of an intriguing and haunting past. Sitting on a park bench, surrounded by trees that whispered in the wind, she couldn't contain her excitement. The cursive letters revealed dark secrets about the Holloway mansion, a place that, according to legend, was surrounded by mysteries and inexplicable disappearances. With each word Ilara read aloud, her eyes sparkled with a mixture of curiosity and adrenaline. "You need to hear this," she exclaimed, attracting the attention of her friends Finn and Jasper, who were playing a card game at a nearby table. Finn, with his protective and cautious manner, looked at Ilara, intrigued. He always admired her passion for stories and adventures, but he couldn't help but worry about what those words might mean. Jasper, on the other hand, seemed uncomfortable. The distant look and hesitant expression suggested that he wasn't as excited about the idea of exploring a haunted mansion. "Disappearances, Ilara? That doesn't sound very safe," said Finn, trying to contain his anxiety. He approached, leaning over to read the pages of the diary. "What are you planning? That mansion could be dangerous." "That's exactly what makes it interesting," Ilara replied, with a mischievous smile. "Imagine if we found some hidden treasure or discovered the truth behind all this. It would be an incredible adventure." Jasper, who had approached, looked at the diary with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "But what if the stories are true? What if there's something there that we shouldn't find?" His voice trembled slightly, reflecting a fear he couldn't name. The air around him seemed heavy, as if the surrounding trees were listening to his hesitation. "Come on, Jasper. A little fear is normal, but we have to live a little," Ilara insisted, her tone contagious. Finn looked into Jasper's eyes, trying to convey security. He knew that Ilara's curiosity was almost uncontrollable, but the protection of friends always came first. "Okay, fine," Jasper finally agreed reluctantly. "Just if something happens, I won't be responsible for it." The tension in his tone was palpable, and Ilara smiled, realizing that she had managed to convince him. With the decision made, the trio headed to the Holloway mansion, located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a fog that seemed to crawl along the ground. As they approached, the imposing structure rose against the blue sky, its broken windows and creaking doors, as if they were guarding long-forgotten secrets. The atmosphere around was strange, and Jasper felt a shiver run down his spine. As they pushed the door, which creaked unsettlingly, the group entered a world shrouded in shadows. The smell of mold and dust flooded their nostrils, while the sunlight could barely penetrate the cracks of the dirty windows. The echo of their footsteps seemed to get lost in the walls, creating a feeling that they were being watched by something invisible. Finn hesitated for a moment, feeling that the mansion was breathing as if it were alive. "Come on, we can't just stand here," said Ilara, full of determination. She led the way, while Finn and Jasper followed, cautious. With each step, Jasper's discomfort increased. He looked around, trying to ignore the feeling that something was about to happen. The walls of the mansion seemed to whisper, and he could barely distinguish whether they were just echoes of his own mind, or if there really was something more there. In the entrance hall, a large spiral staircase rose toward the upper floor, and an old portrait of smiling children decorated the wall. Seeing them, Jasper felt a knot form in his stomach. The cheerful expressions of the children seemed to contrast with the darkness that surrounded the house. He couldn't shake the feeling that those children were watching him, as if their eyes followed him, awakening an inexplicable fear within him. "Look at this," Ilara said, pointing to the portrait. "These children must have been the ones who disappeared. This only increases our curiosity." The excitement in her voice was contagious, but Jasper couldn't share the same enthusiasm. He moved away slightly, feeling a growing pressure in his chest. "Let's focus on exploring," suggested Finn, trying to calm the tension that was beginning to form between them. But as the shadows danced around them, the Holloway mansion held secrets that would challenge not only the trio's courage, but also their own insecurities. Ilara crouched down, her fingers touching the dusty surface of a wooden box that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The smell of mold and deteriorated wood invaded her nostrils as she lifted the lid, revealing a collection of worn toys, each telling a story of lost innocence. There were dolls with empty eyes, a wooden cart with a broken wheel, and a teddy bear that, despite its worn appearance, still exuded an aura of affection. The nostalgic environment enveloped her, but a wave of fear immediately followed, as if the memories of the children who once played there were trapped between the walls of the mansion. Finn, who was watching beside her, noticed the expression on Ilara's face. Her curiosity transformed into a mixture of empathy and concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, trying to understand what was going through her mind. Her gaze was distant, as if she were lost in a time when children's laughter still echoed through those corridors. "These toys, they belonged to them, didn't they?" said Ilara, her voice trembling slightly. Finn nodded, the gravity of the situation beginning to weigh on them. Meanwhile, Jasper, who until then had remained in the background, felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The doll's gaze seemed to follow his movements, and he involuntarily moved away, seeking a more open space. "We should leave," he said, his voice hesitant but firm. "This place it's strange." The tension between the friends began to intensify, and Finn, always the protector, tried to calm the situation. "Just a moment more, Jasper. We need to understand what happened here." Finn's voice was soft, but there was a determination there that didn't go unnoticed by Ilara. She turned to Jasper, trying to convince him to stay. "Let's just look a little more. There might be something important that we need to discover." Jasper, feeling pressured, hesitated. He wanted to support his friends, but fear was beginning to take root in his heart. Meanwhile, Finn approached a locked door on the opposite side of the hall. He crouched down and began looking for a way to open the lock. The metallic sound of his effort echoed in the unsettling silence of the mansion. Suddenly, a soft whisper, almost inaudible, penetrated the air. "Finn!" The call was faint, but he felt a shiver run through his body. He paused for a moment, adrenaline rushing through his veins. "Did you hear that?" he asked, eyes wide. Ilara and Jasper exchanged suspicious glances, but Ilara, driven by her curiosity, encouraged him. "Yes, continue. It could be something important." Her tone of voice reflected a mixture of enthusiasm and fear, but Finn hesitated. The whisper seemed to be calling him, but at the same time, there was something alarming in its essence. He took a deep breath and with a decisive movement tried to open the door again. With a creak, the doorknob gave a little, but the door remained firm, as if it were resisting his presence. Meanwhile, Jasper, unable to bear the tension, decided to move away from the group. He walked toward a room at the back, attracted by a faint light emanating from a crack in the door. As he pushed it slightly, he entered and found himself in an environment that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Walls covered with faded wallpaper and a smell of mold greeted him. In the center of the room, an old table supported an open diary. The yellowed pages were filled with trembling handwriting, and as he approached, Jasper felt a tightness in his heart. The words were intimate, revealing the fears and dreams of a child who once inhabited that space. He began to read aloud, his voice echoing off the wall, revealing insecurities that seemed to resonate with what he himself felt. "I am always alone. I'm afraid of being forgotten." With each phrase, the connection with the diary's author became more intense, and he felt as if the shadows of the past were enveloping him. Meanwhile, Ilara and Finn continued to try to open the locked door, but Jasper's uneasiness weighed on them. Ilara looked at Finn, realizing that the atmosphere was changing. "We should find him," she said, the urgency in her voice. Finn agreed, and together they headed toward the room where Jasper was, not knowing that the mansion, with its dark secrets, was about to reveal even more of its shadows. The atmosphere of the Holloway mansion pulsed with a strange and unsettling energy, as if the walls were alive, breathing in the fear and tension that accumulated between Ilara, Finn, and Jasper. As they gathered after their individual explorations, a heavy silence enveloped the group. Ilara, with the old diary in hand, began to share her discoveries. Her voice trembled slightly, but the determination in her eyes shone intensely, reflecting the curiosity and fear that drove her. "I found mentions of a treasure hideout that belonged to the children who disappeared here," she said with a firm voice, trying to instill courage in her friends. Finn, however, couldn't feel the same excitement. He observed Ilara with a mixture of admiration and concern, his mind torn between the desire to protect his friends and the growing feeling of powerlessness. Ilara's words reverberated in his mind, but at the same time, a shadow of doubt began to settle in his heart. What if, by exploring the mansion, they were on the path to a dark fate? Jasper listened in silence, his eyes reflecting an uneasiness that he couldn't ignore. The idea of treasures and adventures soon became a distant memory, replaced by a growing sensation that they were being watched. He couldn't shake the idea that the children from the portrait in the entrance hall were still there somehow, looking at them with a warning gaze. The atmosphere around them seemed to pulse with negative energy, and as the conversation progressed, the lights of the mansion began to flicker, as if the house itself was responding to the climate of tension. A rumble echoed through the corridor, making each of their hearts race. Finn, on impulse, stepped forward, trying to hide his own anxiety. "We need to stay together," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "We can't separate. Not here." But the tension had already spread, and panic began to take hold of Jasper. He was on the verge of losing control, his thoughts becoming a tangle of fears and insecurities. "What if we can't get out? What if we're trapped here forever?" His voice trembled, and the words that came out of his mouth seemed to echo in the heavy air of the mansion. Ilara tried to calm him, but with each attempt, the atmosphere became more oppressive. "Jasper, we need to be strong. We're in this together," she said, but her own voice faltered. The light failed again, leaving them in momentary darkness, and when the lights were restored, a cutting cold took over the environment, as if the mansion itself was reacting to Jasper's panic. "Let's go upstairs," suggested Finn, trying to regain control of the situation. He knew he needed to stay calm, not just for himself, but for his friends. "Maybe we'll find something there that can help us." Reluctantly, the trio began to climb the creaking stairs. Each step resonated like an echo of insecurity, and the feeling that they were being followed intensified. When they reached the upper floor, they spotted a half-open door covered by a heavy red curtain that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Shadows danced around it, and curiosity, mixed with fear, pulled them toward the door. Ilara was the first to approach, her hand hesitating before touching the curtain. The environment seemed to breathe, and the curtain moved slightly, as if an invisible hand was pulling it. Finn and Jasper exchanged nervous glances. The tension was palpable, and the line between curiosity and fear was becoming increasingly thin. "Maybe we should go back," murmured Jasper, but his words were suffocated by Ilara's impulse. She pulled the curtain, revealing a room covered in dust and shadows, where time seemed to have stopped. In the center, an old doll was sitting in a chair, its empty and penetrating gaze fixed on the visitors. The atmosphere had become even heavier, and an icy chill ran down Jasper's spine. He retreated, feeling the pressure of something invisible pushing him back. "This isn't right," he whispered, his voice almost a lament. Ilara, on the other hand, was fascinated. The doll seemed to have a presence of its own, as if it were waiting for something. Finn noticed Jasper's internal struggle, but the shadows of the mansion seemed to close around them, making it impossible to focus on anything other than the oppressive sensation that something was about to happen. The tension between the three grew, and the feeling of being in a labyrinth of fears intensified. Thus, the Holloway mansion, with its secrets and hauntings, seemed to be just beginning to reveal its true nature, and what was meant to be a simple exploration was transforming into a journey to confront the internal demons that each one carried. In the dark room of the Holloway mansion, the atmosphere was charged with tension and mystery. The faint light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ilara, Finn, and Jasper approached an old doll that seemed to come alive under the dying light. The porcelain gaze of the doll reflected a sinister glow, and as the friends approached, a shiver ran down Jasper's spine. He felt as if the doll was observing not only through its eyes, but also knowing his deepest secrets. When Jasper screamed, an echo of terror reverberated through the environment, and the doll, as if it had consciousness, disappeared in an instant, making the tension in the air intensify. Ilara, on impulse, extended her hand in an attempt to grab it, but the doll was no longer there. The silence that followed was almost palpable, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Finn, always the protector, turned to his friends, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "We need to stay together," he said, but his voice sounded more like a plea than an order. The group tried to ignore what had just happened, but the atmosphere around them was becoming increasingly heavy. The whispers that were once distant whispers now seemed to want to infiltrate their minds, making each of them feel exposed, vulnerable. Finn, agitated, began to notice that the voices were intensifying, as if the mansion itself was feeding on their fears. "Ilara, do you feel that?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. She nodded, feeling the pressure in her chest increase. "It's as if we're being watched. Something isn't right here." Jasper, who was trying to stay calm, calm, began to move away, nervous and restless. The feeling that they were cornered intensified with each second. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Suddenly, a door behind them closed with a bang, making everyone's heart race. The sound reverberated through the walls, and the darkness seemed to approach, as if the shadow of the mansion was alive and moving around them. The feeling of being surrounded became real, and the trio found themselves cornered, not knowing where to go. Panic began to take hold of Jasper, and his mind, already fragile, began to yield to the pressure. "We need to get out of here!" he shouted, his voice echoing desperately. Ilara and Finn exchanged glances, each trying to convey courage to the other, but the friendship that united them was now being tested in a way they never imagined. The pressure of the place seemed to be infiltrating their relationships, making them feel increasingly isolated. Finn, who always considered himself the protector of the group, began to question if he could really save them. "Jasper, calm down. We'll get out." Ilara tried to calm him, but her words sounded empty, even to herself. The fear was palpable, and the darkness that surrounded them seemed to feed on their insecurities, transforming each one into a distorted version of themselves. The growing tension between them was almost as oppressive as the darkness of the mansion itself. As they tried to find a way out, the whispers became louder, almost like a chorus of weeping voices crying for help. With each step they took, the feeling that they were not alone increased, and the presence of something evil seemed to intensify. It was as if the mansion was alive, breathing, and feeding on their fears. The trio found themselves at an impasse, and the friendship that until then seemed unbreakable began to crack. The pressure of the environment and the incessant whispers began to create fissures in their relationships, and doubt began to settle in. Finn, who always saw himself as the anchor of the group, began to feel powerless. He didn't know how to protect his friends from something so unknown and terrifying. Ilara, in turn, felt that the situation was slipping out of her control. The confidence she had in herself and in the decisions she made began to waver, and the hope that they could overcome whatever was pursuing them began to dissipate like light on a cloudy day. The silence extended, and the panic that was previously contained was now on the surface. With the door closed behind them and darkness approaching, the trio was about to discover that the true monsters were not just the shadows surrounding them, but also the fears that dwelled in their own hearts. What should have been a simple exploration had transformed into a desperate struggle for survival, and the friendship between them would be severely tested in the hours to come. Finn moved away from the group, feeling the pressure of the oppressive environment of the Holloway mansion. The wood creaked under his feet as he explored the shadowy corridors, the walls seeming to whisper secrets he didn't want to hear. Each step took him deeper into a labyrinth of memories and fears, where the line between past and present dissolved like dust in the air. As he walked, he found himself surrounded by distorted visions of his lost friend, Lucas, who had disappeared years ago. The image of Lucas, with his carefree smile, transformed into a sad specter, his eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to traverse time. "Finn, you can't run from what you feel." The whisper resonated on the walls, echoing in his mind like a painful call. Finn stopped, trying to focus on the reality around him, but Lucas's presence enveloped him, making him question if he was really alone in that mansion. Meanwhile, Ilara and Jasper were in the hall, the tension between them growing like a storm about to break. Jasper, with trembling hands, poured out his fears. "What if one day no one remembers me? What if I become just a shadow in the past?" The words came out of his mouth like a suffocated cry, revealing a vulnerability he had hidden for so long. Ilara, with an understanding look, tried to comfort him. "You are more than that, Jasper. No one can forget you if you leave a mark on the world." But Ilara's attempt to calm him wasn't enough. The atmosphere was heavy with palpable despair, and the whispers became more intense, filling the space with echoes of insecurities that threatened to consume each of them. The connection they shared began to break, and the silence that followed was more deafening than any tiny scream. Finally, Finn decided he needed to return. He took a deep breath, trying to push away the image of Lucas that still haunted him. Upon returning to the hall, he found Ilara and Jasper in a state of panic, their voices rising in a clamor of fear and confusion. "What happened?" he exclaimed, trying to piece together what remained of their friendship. Ilara's gaze was fixed on a dark corner of the room, where shadows danced and twisted. "We don't know what to do, Finn. It's as if the mansion is alive," she said, her voice trembling. Jasper, with wide eyes, shook his head, trying to process the intensity of the situation. "There's something here that wants us, something that feeds on us." Mistrust and fear were on edge, like a thread about to break at any moment. Finn felt a weight in his heart. He wanted to be the protector, the one who would unite the group, but the tension between them was growing, and the feeling of powerlessness enveloped him. "We need to find a way out," he said, his voice firm, but insecurity showed in his eyes. Together, the whispers increased in volume, as if the mansion itself was laughing at their misfortune. Each felt that darkness was approaching, that an abyss awaited them just ahead. Ilara looked at Finn, seeking a spark of hope amid the despair that surrounded them. "If we can stay calm, maybe we can get out of here," she suggested, but the hesitation in her voice contradicted her words. The three united, forming a circle, trying to protect themselves from the shadows that seemed to feed on their fears. However, the atmosphere was charged, and each whisper seemed to bring to the surface the ghosts of their insecurities. Finn felt a growing pressure, as if the mansion was trying to separate them, and the idea of failing to protect his friends consumed him. The reality of the situation began to settle in. The mansion was not just a place of mystery and treasures. It was a dark reflection of everything they feared. Each of them was confronted by their own shadows, and the struggle to keep their friendship intact became more difficult with each passing second. Finn, Ilara, and Jasper needed to face not only the horrors of the mansion, but also the demons that dwelled within them. The line between friendship and survival was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. The atmosphere in the Holloway mansion was charged. Shadows danced on the walls, seeming to take on a life of their own, as Ilara, Finn, and Jasper faced the shadowy figure that materialized before them. It was an oppressive presence, a manifestation of their deepest fears. The air seemed to vibrate with the tension and uncertainty that permeated the environment, leaving them paralyzed for a moment that seemed to drag on eternally. Ilara, with determination burning in her gaze, stepped forward, determined to confront the entity that fed on their insecurities. "We're not afraid of you," she shouted, her voice echoing through the dusty hall. But the shadowy figure, instead of dissipating, seemed to intensify, as if her words had fed the creature even more. Finn, beside Ilara, felt a chill down his spine. He knew that the strength of that entity came from something deeper, something that the three of them shared. He looked at Jasper, who was visibly shaken, and noticed the hesitation in his gaze. Fear had taken hold of him, and distrust began to grow between them, like weeds in an abandoned field. "We need to unite," exclaimed Finn, trying to dispel the tension. But the voice that echoed in the mansion was not just his. It was a collective voice, whispering the insecurities and secrets that each one carried. Ilara, realizing that the shadowy figure seemed to feed on their weaknesses, began to try to gather everyone's courage. "We can face this together. We can't let our fears dominate us," she said, but her determination seemed to get lost in the thickness of the darkness that surrounded them. Suddenly, Jasper, overwhelmed by the feeling of dread, cried out for help. He could no longer bear the pressure. With a sudden movement, he moved away from them, disappearing into a dark corridor. Ilara and Finn were paralyzed, guilt taking hold of them. What could they have done to prevent him from moving away? The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming, and they felt as if the ground beneath their feet was disintegrating. "Jasper!" shouted Finn, but his voice was lost in the darkness that swallowed his friend. The echo of his shout reverberated back like a cruel reminder that they were not alone. Amid the despair, Ilara and Finn tried to follow the path that Jasper had taken, but the darkness seemed denser, as if trying to prevent them from advancing. The shadows closed around them, whispering secrets they didn't want to hear. As they searched for Jasper, reality became more distorted. They felt that the shadows were feeding on their anguish, the frustration and fear that had settled in their hearts. The whispers increased in intensity, creating a chorus of voices that attacked them with memories of their greatest failures and insecurities. With each step, the feeling that they could not return strengthened like an invisible web trapping them. Finally, upon reaching a more remote corner of the mansion, Finn spotted a half-open door. With his heart racing, he pushed it, revealing a small room where light seemed to shine in a peculiar way. However, what they found inside was a spectacle of horrors. Jasper was there, surrounded by shadows that twisted and danced around him like lurking serpents. "Jasper!" called Ilara, but her friend seemed distant, as if in a trance. Finn, fighting against the tide of fear that almost paralyzed him, advanced, but the shadows approached, forming a barrier between them. "Jasper, come back!" implored Finn, but the words seemed to get lost in the darkness. Jasper, in a moment of despair, looked at his friends, and in a gesture that made Finn's heart race, surrendered to the shadows, allowing them to envelop him. The scene unfolded in slow motion, and Ilara and Finn felt as if the ground had collapsed beneath their feet. Jasper's scream echoed through the mansion, a sound that mingled with the whisper of the lost souls that inhabited that place. Desperate, Ilara and Finn tried to reach Jasper, but the shadows became an impenetrable barrier. Guilt and pain invaded them, and the understanding that they had failed to protect their friend crushed them. The mansion, once just a place of mystery, now became a cemetery of their dreams and hopes. They were alone, not knowing how to escape the darkness that surrounded them. The echo of Jasper's sacrifice resonated in their minds, and, as reality became increasingly unbearable, they knew that the battle against the shadows was just beginning.